It has been an intense couple of days, and you've been part of streams, you've heard keynotes, but what you've not heard was what the people in other streams spoke about. And what we were made aware of in our stream was that the voice of youth has been not that prominently represented. However, as we just moved into our bodies and felt our bodies, also these conversations inspired art while we were here. And that's why I would like to invite you to come up and share your poem with us.
Echoes of 1844-1845. I walk on soil carved by lines not my own, borders drawn in Berlin where seeds of pain were sown. 1844-1845 they gathered, pens sharp as swords, sliced my motherland. No care of our cords. My rivers, my gold, my people, my kin, plundered for profit, branded as sin. The missionaries came with crosses held high, preached love and salvation, yet let freedom die. Their gospel, a chain dressed in sacred disguise, built churches on graves, silenced ancestral cries. Ecumenism promised unity, a holy embrace, but too often it veiled the theft of my people. Anti-blackness feasters, a wound unaddressed, in global halls of power, in hearts that detests, from cotton fields to mines, my sweat built their thrones, yet my name is erased. My story unknown. Coloniality lingers in systems, in minds, in wealth gaps, in shackles, in futures confined. I am young, but I carry the weight of the past. Each scar on my soul, a story, a history vast. My dreams choke on borders, my hopes bear their chains, yet my spirit still rises, though sorrow and pain. A divided Africa weeps, our strength torn apart, but a pulse beats alive in my defiant heart. Decolonize, I cry, let the old lies unravel. Reclaim the truths buried beneath empire's gravel. Reparatory justice, not charities, guys. A theology of freedom where blackness can rise. Ecumenism reborn, not in cathedrals of stone, but in deep solidarity where no one is alone. I reimagine a world where my roots are my crown, where Africa's unity lifts us. No force drags us down. Reparations not begged, but demanded, restored, for the blood of my kin, for the wealth they ignored. True freedom is justice, not promises thin. It's land, it's love, it's right to begin. Oh, Spirit of Ubuntu, guide us to mend. Let ecumenical hearts join hands to transcend. From the ashes of Berlin, let new futures bloom. A decolonial dawn where Black lives consume the light of true freedom, unyielding, unbowed, a young African's dream, unshackled and proud. In solidarity, Makena.
Thank you very much, McKenna, for that prophetic word. Yes, much appreciated by all. At this point, it's time for us to hear from some of the streams so that we might hear what some of the other streams were doing. Each stream has appointed a spokesperson who I would love to invite to be part of this panel. And the people are McKenna and Lackey and Marvia. So if you could come up, please. We will have some time to engage in conversation and questions together so that we can collectively hear what was discussed. So we can begin in any order, but as you begin, we'd just invite you to share your name and what stream you were part of. And then we'd invite you to respond to this question. So what is a 2-point or 2-minute summary of your stream?
Right, my name is Makena. I was in stream 3, the stream on reparative justice. Summary of what we did is that the work of decolonization and reparative justice is hindered, incomplete, and in many ways and instances have not even started as yet. Our conversation here must be carried forward through a dedicated and committed team that will ensure that the reflections, critical engagements, and discussions and recommendations are publicized all the way to the grassroots. Because people at the grassroots are enslaved and they don't know that they're enslaved. It's time that they know.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Lakitisa Tseko from Mozambique, and I was part of the first stream. Well, there was a lot that we actually talked about from our own perspectives, our own contexts, where we heard some reflections around what is happening around us, talking about the legacies of colonialism, which still persist up to date, where we have our economies, which are, when I say our economy, I mean in the African context, but not only Africa. We also have people of African descent, and we're talking also about people from the Caribbean who usually go through racism and various forms of discrimination. I was mentioning some of the legacies, economy. We also talked about the education, which is still poor, where people cannot afford the most basic services for their own well-being. Also, we were talking about the indigenous people, because it's also important that we talk about those people because they are not forgotten and they do matter. Also, just as we ended our meeting as a stream, we were talking about what we can actually do. Because as individuals, as a collective group of people, there is a lot that we can actually do in order to get rid of the legacies of colonialism. I think I could even mention more, but as time goes by.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. I am Marvia Laws, and I am from Jamaica. I represent Stream 2, where we looked at mission theology and anti-Black racism. And again, like my fellow sisters described, we had an intense 2 days, quite engaging, and we really spent a lot of time trying to unpack what mission theology is. And this feeds into, I'd say, two of the things that we came away with. We did go all over, and we have spoken of work that has been done and work that needs to continue. Just to highlight 2 points, one of them that we looked at is what exactly is mission theology and what it ought to be like. And we have come away with the concrete belief that mission theology, with all the definitions that we might have that inform the way we execute mission or our missional, share or bear a missional presence in the world, it must be contextual. And that is important for us. The second thing, we came to an agreement of the importance of decolonization. And we believe that in theory and practice, decolonization must be something that we all understand what it means. And it's not just something that stays at the top with those who are discussing it like we are, but it must become something that is owned by all of our member churches, all of our membership, and together we should have a common understanding of what decolonization is in theory and practice. We concluded that these two items, mission theology being contextual, a common understanding of decolonization, is not something we're starting with. We have to go back to look at where this process began, how it entered into conversations within the World Council of Churches, and we should allow the historical thought to inform where we are now, evaluate that, or those understandings that we can find in the archives that informed previous conferences, and allow that to inform us going forward.
Thank you very much to all of you. Those are very concise summaries of what were very full and robust conversations over a few days. So thank you for that. Another question for your consideration. From your stream, what emerged that was new, surprising, or particularly urgent?
This is for stream one. Okay, so for us, maybe not surprising, because even though at some point, talking exactly about my context, we don't talk about decolonization at all at church and all those things, but maybe that it is urgent that we address this issue or around decolonization, and we should also include even those ones, I would say, that are underprivileged, because we are here and we are all privileged actually to be here, but there are those who are not able to learn about this. And I could even mention the indigenous people that are as if they were forgotten and all around that. So at some point they are still they are still colonized. People are really colonized, and it is an urgent call to act now. I would even say, more than always having discussions, having conversations, it's already time that we act. It is already time that we stand up and go to where things are really happening, address the issues, see the possibilities of really acting against the legacies of racism, colonization, and everything around the topic that brought us here for these 2-3 days.
All right. In our group, so there's nothing new that we were talking about. These are issues that we've been talking about since a long time ago. And the World Council of Churches, as we all know, in 1975, Nairobi, Kenya, and coming from Kenya, named racism a sin. And conversations were there before then, so there's nothing new. But there's something particularly urgent from our group. We need the call for reparations to come out more strongly in the conference's recommendations and call to action section of the communique in clear and direct, not sanitized language. And I think that has been our problem, sanitizing the truth. What was a surprise for me and my fellow young people is the limited participation of youth in this conference. Actually, we did the calculation. We are only 4%. In my place, we say we cannot talk about us without us. We are not enough. The two of us, the three of us, we are three. We are not enough. Then, yeah, I think leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for that, because that point did come up among us as well in stream 2. And the observation was made by way of a question. And I'll pose that question to us since it's really relevant. If we should just look around this room right now, the conversation we're having, who is it for? Who do we expect to implement these things in the next 10 years, 20 years? And where are they? So that is something that we really ought to think about. For us, I believe it was forcefully brought to the fore how easily we slip into talking about Africa as a monolith, as it's a homogeneous space. And so as the conversations unraveled, we had to acknowledge that when we're talking about the continent, we're talking about different experiences in different spaces. And so even the way we prefaced the conversation to talk about, oh, this happened in Africa, we were stopped in our tracks. And that is one of the things that emerged, that when we're talking about Africa and the atrocities that occurred in Africa, working with the 1884 to 1885 Berlin Conference, just a starting point, because we know that missionaries were there before. But even starting at that point, the lines of demarcation that were drawn also informed how colonialism would have unfolded in that place, and how the church and missionaries and mission theology would have been carried out, or how theology informed mission in those spaces. That means that different experiences should inform the conversations in terms of the responses that we hope to give. There's no one size fits all, but again, responses ought to bear context in mind. That said, one of the things that was consistent in terms of what came out to us is that on the continent or in the diaspora, the strength and the power of agency came out. And that's something that we have to talk about, because in all these spaces, what we have found is consistently the Africanization of Christianity. So on the continent, in the spaces, the theologies that were received were reinterpreted. Scripture was reinterpreted. Whether it was affirmed is a different thing, because even that in some spaces would cause separations. So that was flagged as something that we have to lift up as a positive, that Africans in the diaspora and on the continent used their agency, exercised their agency to reinterpret and to shun, to discard, and now are celebrating growth in some places as a result of this reinterpretation. But another thing that we also think is important is memory. And I know that's going to come up later on in a broader context, but we want to talk about the importance of memory for Africans and for Africans in the diaspora. So we are talking about a memorial culture, that in our spaces, we do not have enough positive affirmation of spaces that tells our story, and we do not do enough to tell our story ourselves. Our story is told by others, stories are told about us, but how are we telling the stories of our children and to our grandchildren, and to the youth who are not present at this conference?
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you very much for sharing what was new, surprising, and urgent, as well as your questions for the group that is gathered here. There's one final question for your consideration, and that is, what from your stream gives you hope?
First of all, it gives us hope, the fact that today or during these 3 days, people were not gathered to talk about us without us. We are here, we are involved in the discussions, and that's going to help us in the years to come. Even though we are here in a reduced number, as my colleague Jackie mentioned previously, this is going to be applied in our own contexts. We are making sure that whatever we discussed here is going to be applied. Action is going to be taken, as we are not just here to spend time. For us coming from Africa, we are here maybe to explore the cold weather that there is in Benin. But we are here to learn, but also to take action. And another thing that gives me particularly much hope is that the church is addressing the issue at a global level. And as a stream, we are all willing to take action in our various spaces. Even if it is just one person taking action, we are pretty sure that that action is going to be visible at some point, and it is going to bring change in our own contexts, not only in Africa, but also with everyone around the world. Because as much as we are calling upon people to change towards how we as people of African descent and Africans are treated, we also need to change our mindset. We also need to reimagine, as we are saying, the future. But for us to reimagine the future, we need to reappraise the present. So that gives me pretty much hope, and it is my prayer really that everyone really does take action in their different spheres of influence. And for us as Africans that we are, and with our Pan-African movement, Africa my home, Africa my future, we are going really to take action, and we are not stopping here, we are moving forward.
Right, thank you, Lucky. We are biased today because you chose young people to speak. And one of our hopes also is that even in the limited participation of youth, we were hopeful and re-energized by the young people's participation, especially in our stream. They can attest to that. And Daniel Wave is a fellow young person, and we really problematized the issues in our streams. And the participation of young people is invaluable. Please stop taking us as footnotes. We want to be on the table, not as the menu, but as equal participants of the table. Not telling us to write our youth statement, then we come present it, then that's it. And I give an example. Since 1948, the first assembly of the World Council of Churches, I've gone through all the youth statements up to Kasrwe. We all complain about the same thing: participation of young people. We refuse to be tokenized. So please value our participation and stop trivializing us. Then another hope from our group was that we had candid, raw conversations which were uncomfortable, but we had them. And that was hopeful. It's time we start telling each other the truth. The truth hurts, but for us to revisit the wounds, we need to tell each other the truth. And thank you so much for all of us for speaking our truth. Thank you.
inspired by these young voices, I must also point out that this is quite unusual for us to be having an event of this nature and closing off with something other than a manual. We have 4 women here having this conversation. But we really, really wrestled, and going through the conversations, there were moments when the passion ran high, and there were those of us who felt that, really, why are we doing this? We're going through this. Will anything come of what we're doing? It's not the first time we're having conferences about racism. And we have had instances in the past where the conversations ended up with organizations being split as a result of this race question. So there were those fears and concerns. But the hopeful nature or the hopeful way in which we ended was on the fact that we were able to have the conversations, and how we communicated with each other, and how open we were to hear each other. And one of our sisters kept reminding us that when we leave here, we are to remember as we go forward with what we have come up with, is that the importance is to be laid on truth-telling and deep listening and a commitment. So it means that we have to do work to build the moral courage to act and to not continue to have the conferences, do a few sessions, and table our findings. And so we hope that all the work that we have done and the final document that we will work on, we hope that the Spirit will encourage the hearts of Central Committee to receive this document and for something to come out of it. We hope that we will also have the courage to write to all the participating nations who met at the Berlin Conference and require of them an apology or something. Since you began in the name of God, how will you act now as the time demands in the name of God? And one of the things that we also hope is that there will be work between the churches here in Berlin and the grassroots community to erect a memorial, an African memorial, something that recollects what happened to the African peoples in Germany. Not just because there is a Holocaust museum. We're not competing for recognition. Nobody competed for genocide or for colonialism. But we're saying that memory is important and it is urgent, and that something of that nature ought to be here as well. And we hope that we will find the courage in the name of God, through the power of the Spirit of God, to do this.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for sharing your insights, and thank you for sharing your hopes. And I hope that everyone has been able to gather a flavor of the conversation that happened in the streams, as well as some of the challenges, some of the ideas for taking home. So a special thanks to this amazing group of women, to McKenna and Laki and Marvia. So thank you once again.
Now that the mystery is resolved, what is happening now? But I will say a few words as well. No, I mean, this is a beautiful finishing of the conference, and I want to express this, but I also want to share a few thoughts that also have to do with my own context, because I speak here as the moderator of the World Council of Churches, but I'm also German, and we are in Berlin, the capital of my home country. So I have had many emotions today, many emotions that were joy of being together with a community that I love, with a diverse community. Being here in Berlin in my own country as the moderator. So that was wonderful. And the spirit of this meeting was wonderful, even though I came last night, but I dived into this wonderful spirit of community, of sisterhood, of brotherhood, and that with a really serious theme, a really painful theme. And that's why you can imagine that I also had emotions of shame today, listening to stories and seeing the lack of appropriate dealing with these stories. I experienced beautiful moments. For example, when Priscilla was giving the homily and was talking about Matthew 25, and she was standing like this and talking to us. And then she was the right and left, you remember? And then all of a sudden, it was the other way around. So it's not only shame, but it's also the joy of having someone who stands up for me with all my guilt, with all my sin, and who gives me hope. So this was a beautiful gesture. But also, dear Jerry, I was very happy. I thought you gave a brilliant lecture. And of course, I was very happy how you wove Dietrich Bonhoeffer into your thoughts, who is so important to me. And I was on the 9th of April on his 80th death day. We had an international conference on Dietrich Bonhoeffer in Flossenbürg at the place where he was executed. He was hanged by the Nazis. And that morning of the 9th of April, we celebrated a worship service. And I say celebrate with ambivalence, but we held a worship service, a prayer, really exactly at the place where he was hanged. And that was very powerful. And I often thought, how would he, and when he was executed, it was 2 weeks before the liberation of the camp. And they could already hear the fire, the gunfire, I was told, in that concentration camp. So I sometimes thought, if they had been there 2 weeks earlier and Bonhoeffer would have lived on, what would he have given to us? And as you know and have experienced many times, we have a strong remembrance culture in Germany. It's about the Holocaust. It's about the murdering of 6 million Jews in Germany. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer was one of the witnesses, or one of the people who gave us the resources for that remembrance culture. He said, if we expel the Jews from the Occident, we expel Christ from the Occident, because Christ was a Jew. Now, I deal as a moderator, but also as a German, as a citizen, as a world citizen. I deal with the situation in Israel and Palestine. And what's happening in Gaza. We just made a very strong statement at our executive committee meeting. And as you have read in the newspapers, we have this discussion in Germany, and people shake their heads about the Germans, because they are speaking about the suffering of Jews in the Holocaust, which is right, which I'm glad that we have that remembrance culture. But what about the people in Gaza? And it's changing, fortunately. I hear many people who say, this is unbelievable what's happening, and we cannot keep silent. And I wonder, what would Bonhoeffer have said? I think, and that's a thought that came to my mind today. I think he would have said, if we kill or expel human beings like the people in Gaza, we expel Christ from the Occident. He would have applied that to universal humanity. And he would not have been afraid of speaking up against unbelievable injustice today beyond the Jewish people, which we will always remember the deep pain that was caused by what Germans did at that time. But I was taught with this remembrance. I grew up with this remembrance culture. But I was not taught to reserve universal human values just to some. But I was taught to apply universal human values to every human being that is created in the image of God. That is why I, in Germany, have to tell this to my people and to those who shy away from denouncing the terror against the people in Gaza and the immense, unbelievable suffering that is happening every day. We must do both. We must be radically sensitive to suffering, no matter from what place it comes. I always quote a woman, Margot Friedländer. She is a Holocaust survivor. She died last week in the age of 103 years. And to the last days, just 2 days before she died, she was talking to students in a classroom, and she was a wonderfully graceful old woman. She came back from New York to Germany in the age of 88. She came back to her hometown Berlin. And one sentence she repeated again and again. She said, "There is no Christian blood. There is no Jewish blood. There is no Arab or Muslim blood. There's only human blood." And I think this is the message that we are called to say as loud as possible wherever we can. And of course, now I come to the colonialism theme of our conference, because these two things have a lot to do with each other. Because, and this was said before, we have this really strong remembrance culture, and it's a strong humanitarian force. But there is a lack of remembrance culture for colonialism. And that's almost like a blind spot. It's there. There are some people that talk about it and that do research about it. And you have met some people on Sunday. But I'm telling you something that I'm ashamed of. You were at the place where the building was located, where the Berlin Conference took place. I grew up, I learned about the Berlin Conference in my class, in my school, but I didn't remember much. I just knew this was the colonialism conference, and I couldn't tell you much from my school teaching. I learned a lot about German guilt in the Holocaust, which is good. But I did not learn what I would have had to learn about colonialism and the millions and millions of victims of dead that were caused by this colonialism that was founded, or at least organized in a major way, in this city. And I, as a chairman of the Council of the Protestant Churches, which I was besides of the Bishop of Bavaria, I was for 6 or 7 years, I think, for all the Protestant churches. I had my office in Hanover, which is a city west of here. But I also had a desk in Berlin, not far from here, at the Gendarmenmarkt. I had the EKD has an office there, and when I was in Berlin and talked to politicians and stuff, this was my office. And it was only actually in preparation of this conference that I asked someone, where actually was the Berlin Conference? I never asked anyone, and nobody ever told me. And then I had an exchange with Kenneth. And maybe it was even Kenneth who gave me the address when they had their preparatory meeting for this conference. And I realized, Wilhelmstraße, that's not far from my office. So the next time I was in Berlin, I went directly from the train station with all my luggage, because I really wanted to see that place now. And he had told me that there was a plate and everything. I wanted to see it. So I went with my luggage from the train station to the Wilhelmstraße. And I was looking for the plate. I went around the building. I saw the number. This must be it. Of course, it's a different building now, and there's nothing visible. So I went around the corner. I saw a group of people with a guide. And I thought, this is a historical, guide, and he's explaining people something. So with my suitcase, I went up to them. They were a little surprised, I think. And I asked the guide, when he was explaining something to the people, where is the building now? Or where is exactly that plate on the Berlin Conference? And he looked at me and said, well, he was explaining about the ashes of Adolf Hitler. Because this was the place where Adolf Hitler committed suicide and then was burned. Where the ashes of Adolf Hitler was. That was exactly behind the building of the Berlin Conference. And that is what this guy was explaining. He couldn't tell me where that plate of the Berlin Conference was. So I walked back. I went into a cafe and I said, where's the plate? I was told that I saw it in the internet actually. So there was a cafe with people from all backgrounds you could see. The guy couldn't tell me. It's somewhere there must be something. So I looked, and it took me very long until I went from the sidewalk, that is a little bit away from the street, to the street and found that plate that you all probably saw. And it's a good plate. It's not big enough, and it's not a memorial, but it's at least a plate. But when you walk the sidewalk, you don't see it because it's at the street. And what car driver would stop in the middle of the road to look at this plate? So I realized how far away we still are from the remembrance culture we need. Everyone must know where the building of the Berlin Conference was. And we have a museum of the Wannsee Conference. It's a museum, it's the old building, I admit still, so that's it's still there. It's the place in 1942 where the officials of the German government decided about the annihilation of European Jewry, the murder. They decided it, they made plans in that building. And that is a museum, and that is good. And Sinti and Roma. And other groups actually too. But this is the kind of remembrance place we would need for the Berlin Conference, wherever it can be. But we do need a memorial, as we had talked about already in our subgroup, and that was voiced already now. And we need a systematic look at all the places where colonialism was produced, was regenerated. And I gave a lecture half a year ago on remembrance culture. In my home region, in northern Bavaria, it was an association of regional historians, but the church was full. And I asked them to do the same with colonialism that people did with the Holocaust, because many students of high schools, they did research papers on Jewish families that lived in their villages or cities and that were expelled and murdered. So they were looking for local places where the Holocaust was produced. And we need that culture of local sites where colonialism was regenerated or even produced. And there is one in my home region. And there was at least a newspaper article on it. It's called the Niederfüllbach Foundation Stiftung. And it was indirectly money from King Leopold II. And it had to do with Congo. That money he robbed from Africa, it went in different ways, went into that foundation. So this is an example for how you can do local history and uncover the remnants of the injustice of colonialism and maybe talk about reparation by the foundation or whatever. So that is something, and I did some research, but there is not enough in the internet. I will keep looking at that. So these are all examples for how in my specific context in Germany, we could take that example of a good remembrance culture in this one huge injustice of the Holocaust and apply what we have learned from that to this other huge injustice of colonialism that, as we have seen, heard, and felt today, is keep being on, or is enduring until today. So I will use everything I've learned in this conference. I will use this to spread the news about these necessities, and to maybe work with others towards a memorial and other points of remembrance culture that might help us with this. I have talked about political acts for remembrance culture and things that everyone could engage in, but I also want to say a word about spirituality, about theology. It was repeated today, what was said already in Nairobi in 1976, racism is sin. And I think that when we talk about sin, we need to be very clear that sin is not primarily something that has to do with sexuality and all these things that were interpreted into this word, often misused word. But sin is what, and now comes the Lutheran bishop, sin is what Martin Luther beautifully described. He said, sin is, Latin, homo incurvatus in se ipsum, human being incurved in him or herself, like a bent in yourself. I don't really know the good English word, but it's like this movement. You think you're reaching out to God or the other human being, but in the end, it's only about yourself. Now, we know this individually from us, and we confess it. But it's not only homo incurvatus, a human being, it's also communio incurvata. It's also communities that are bent in themselves. Now think about what those communities would be. I think it's absolutely clear. Nationalism is a sin because a nation is bent in itself. And of course, racism is a sin because a race, the white race or whatever race it might be, is curved in itself and puts it above others. And so we come to, and colonialism, of course, is also a sin because there are powers that completely negate the humanity of other people. So I think we need to make clear the connection between this political question and the deeply spiritual question. It's not just politics, as people sometimes say, when we say we need to fight for justice, for the poor and all these things. We say it politically, but it's spiritual. It's at the core of our faith. And we cannot pray without doing justice. I must quote again Dietrich Bonhoeffer, because he said, there are three things that form a Christian existence. And I live from these three things that I learned with Dietrich Bonhoeffer: praying, doing justice, and waiting for God's time. So you can never pray, he says, you can never pray without doing justice. You're not praying to the God of Jesus Christ if you do not do justice, if you don't care about the suffering of the other. You're not praying to Christ. So doing justice, being there for others, and also looking at yourself is a necessary connection with praying. And then waiting for God's time. I don't know whether I could live without that, because there's so much suffering in this world. There's so much violence, so much oppression, so much asymmetry and lack of dignity. So I would despair if I would just base my, I'm reminded of the watch, thank you. If I would just base my hope on empirical indications. I do not have to base my hope on empirical indications. I can base my hope on the biggest hope narrative that the world has ever seen. And that is the biblical narrative that Jesus, who died as a victim of torture, Jesus, who stands for all those who are now crying out as he has cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? This Jesus has been resurrected and is alive. and gives us hope and lets us know deep in our heart that we're not walking towards a dark spot anywhere. We're walking towards a new heaven and a new earth, where all pain is overcome, where all suffering is overcome, where all crying is overcome, where all tears are wiped away. That is why, despite all this injustice, despite all this suffering, I go into the future with hope, especially after such a beautiful conference as today. Thank you.